Hello, and welcome to an all new episode of the Black Empowerment 365 show. I am one of your hosts, Kinte, all the way live from Los Angeles, California, and I'm joined by my wonderful co host, the one and only Quianna. How you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. Unfortunately, I'm in a state of flux because
Oh no.
my office, I'm taking some stuff out, and hopefully the next time you guys see me on, it'll look the way I want it to look. But I'm looking at your background. And you got the books going. You got look at that. You got the good books too. It ain't the fluff, and it's such a much more nicer, more visually appealing background. So I'm gonna need you to come and redecorate mine.
Oh no. You know how long it took me to do this?
Was
Oh
not
my
always
gosh.
like that.
No, it wasn't. It was not. But I'm very excited about tonight and our guests, and I will give you the honors to introduce our guest.
Well, it is definitely an honor, and
Mm-hmm.
our guest. This is his second time coming on indie radio. He was on our Mars Men and Women Talk Mars Venus show, and
Mm.
one of the few people to be the single guest because we usually have panels, but he was definitely a strong enough person to have. And it's the one and only author, musician, filmmaker, Lenon Honor. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing good, brother. Thank you for having me. I look forward to talking with you. And sis, thanks for having me as well.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Now, Lenon Honor, he's a person that I came to know about because there's a show that I watched called the Freeman Fly Show, and it's mainly about conspiracy stuff and that kind of thing. And I told this story, and I'll tell it briefly. When I was watching that show, I watched it. I watched, he brought Lennon on 5 minutes into the interview, and I was like, wait, I got to know who this brother is. So I actually stopped the interview, went and found his website, and I must have binged through a lot of his content. Then I went back and finished the interview that he did with Freeman Fly, and I was just blown away by the content. And it's funny, I have yet to have you on the show to talk about what I initially saw you in, and the content that made me become a fan of your work. But it just shows you that this brother does so much good work
Mhm.
that what I'm saying. It's just not one thing you can talk to this guy about. So it's a blessing to have you back on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you on. And can you give us just a brief overview of who you are, what you do, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, in the first place, I'm a husband and father. My wife and I, we just celebrated 17 years together last weekend. Yeah, it goes by so quickly too. And we've been in a loving relationship, and I'm a blessed man. We have 5 beautiful children. So most importantly, my commitment to my wife and to my children is the most important thing in my life and has been since I met my wife 17 years ago. But of course, I do a lot of other things too. I've written books, produced documentaries. I'm also a musician. I went to college to study music. Um, well, that's pretty much it. I'm on, and I also have a full-time job. I work I'm a dock worker. I'm on a forklift. This past week I did 51 hours. so so
Wow.
in addition to everything else that I do in terms of creative work and trying to help people, I also help people with male-female relationships in private sessions, life coaching sessions, but also relationship sessions, coaching sessions. In addition to all of that, I hold that full-time job so that I can provide more for my family. Because at the end of the day, that's what it all comes down to: being the right type of a model for a husband and father, especially for my sons, and I want my daughters to see that as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
I'm gonna hit the fellas on the dock. Do they really know who they working with?
No, and really, brother, I'm really an average, regular old dude. Like when I started working there, people don't see me any different. I tend to have a very positive attitude while I'm there, so people notice that. And my work ethic is like 100%. Every day I go in and I give 100% no matter what. It's not the most glamorous job, and it's physically taxing, and we're exposed to the elements, and we're in Utah, so when it's cold, it's cold. Um, But the main thing is that for me, as I'm really an average man, and I feel like what I do is exactly what I should be doing for my family. And I think they pick up on that. So they don't see me as anything extraordinary because they're not familiar with my work at all. And that's okay. I'm a regular old dude.
It's good. That's separate too, you know. Like, yeah, it's good to have, you know, that in one place, and then you can just come and work and do what you got to do. So, and
Yeah.
you're in Utah, right? You just recently made the move, right?
Yeah, thankfully we moved about 7 months ago, and we were living in a rough situation for many years, and we finally got out, and we are so thankful. We are so blessed, and since we've been here, it's been a total shift on so many different levels, but in particular from our family. You know, our children, they can go outside and play, but we don't have to worry about anything crazy happening outside. You know, my wife, she feels safe and secure. And you know, I'm also a lecturer too. This past 2 weekends, I was this last weekend I was in Sacramento. The weekend before that I was in Phoenix, Arizona, lecturing. And this was the first time that I was able to leave the house and feel perfectly secure and not have anxiety. And that has to do with the fact that we're living in a peaceful environment. It's a beautiful home, and it has been one of the best things that has happened for my family since our last baby was born. So yeah, we are welcome to move. We are thankful and we're grateful, and for sure we're not going back.
Oh, that's a big move, though.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we also like to ask about your background as a teenager, or you growing up. If you could share a little bit about yourself, the young.
Yes, yes. And I did that in the last two lectures. I gave people my background, and people tend to kind of be surprised because I think we tend to do that when we meet people. It may be later on in life, and we make these assumptions about them depending upon where they're at in their life at that moment. But the truth is that we all have a story.
Absolutely.
And part of the reason why I've committed so strongly to trying to be the best man that I can be, it's an everyday process, trying to do better for my wife and for my children. Being a better father, being a better husband was because when I was growing up, that's not what I saw. That's not what I was privy to, and that's not what my siblings saw. That's not what my mother experienced either. And I grew up in an extremely abusive household, and my father had addiction issues, not just alcohol, but also drugs. And then at a certain point, it was crack cocaine. And when crack cocaine hit, it was like an atomic bomb. It destroyed so many different families, and my family was not exempt from that. So, you know, growing up, up until the age of 13, my father was in the home. But then after that, but he was extremely abusive during that time. But then after that, he was out of the home, and I've been fatherless since. So part of my journey has been recognizing that no matter what it is that you have experienced as a young boy or a young girl, for that matter, doesn't mean that you can't transcend it and become something that is meaningful. In other words, that you can become a man even if you don't have a father in your life. That you can become a woman even if you don't have a father or mother in your life, for that matter. So that's kind of like my backstory, just overcoming my childhood situation, and then creating for my wife and for my children a loving household, a dedicated husband and father, and providing them with the security that I didn't necessarily have, and the safety factor that I didn't necessarily have growing up. And I think that is the most important message that I can give to anybody, that you can overcome your childhood upbringing, and you can make something of yourself, and not just for yourself, but for your family.
And you're from the Bay, right? From Oakland?
No, I'm from Southern California, San Diego, but I met my wife in Oakland, California. Yeah, so we got a lot of wonderful memories, my wife and I.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's me. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry, brother.
Well, I've never been to California at all. So one day I'll make it out there. So okay, Kinte, you have a question?
Oh yeah. What the first thing I think I want to say is, for those who may not know, the main reason why we have Brother Honor here today is because he's recently did a film called Beyond Gangster Blackface, a critical analysis of gangster rap. And I think, you know, I've seen the film, me and Quianna, and it's a wonderful film. And I feel like it is something that we definitely need to talk about as a community. and talk about and we want people to go out and buy the film. And if we're taking callers today, the number is 323-522-4601. Once again, that number is 323-522-4601. And so we're gonna at some way we're gonna figure out, we're gonna actually give away a copy at some point in this episode. But we want to talk in great detail about this film and about the subject matter. And I want to first start off. The first question I have is, what made you make this film?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons. Because you brought up when I was in the conspiracy theory paradigm, and I was producing documentaries dealing with what people classify as conspiracy theories. And the reason why I got into that was the same reason why I decided to do this documentary. In essence, I wanted to produce content that would assist parents in protecting their children from negative media programming.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't realize it when they're being exposed to negative media programming, how it can impact them through the repetition, how it can impact how they see themselves, how they see others, how men see women, how women see men, how parents see their children, how children see their parents. It goes on and on and on, the different degrees of programming that's out there. So I remember there was an announcement that was made a couple of years ago about there was going to be a film biopic, a movie that was going to be done of this rap group called NWA. And when I first heard it, I was like, are they serious? Are they really going to do a movie about this group? Because I started thinking back to when I was growing up and I used to listen to NWA. And I was just thinking back, like, why out of all of the hip hop or rap groups that are out there, why would they choose that group out of all? I just thought that was real perplexing. You know what I'm saying? And what I thought about was, I started thinking about the negative impact that group, the lyrics in particular, had on the African American community and a lot of the men or young boys that I was growing up with during that time period, but also the negative impact that it had on me. It impacted how I spoke, in particular, the language that I began to use, and how I began to talk about young ladies and the terminology that I began to use. It was directly related to the terminology that they kind of proliferated through their lyrical content, NWA. And so what I told myself, what I was going to do was, I said, I think I'm going to put together a documentary where we engage in a critical analysis of their lyrics so that we can identify what are the major themes in their lyrics, because the major themes, that's the main programming. And it doesn't matter what the media source is. It could be a movie, a television show. It could be music lyrics. It can be the book that you're reading. It could be the television show, whatever the case may be. It's going to have some sort of an impact on the listener, especially young, impressionable boys and girls. And in particular, in the African American community, the impact is emboldened simply because a lot of us, we grow up without these positive male role models, in many cases without our fathers. So we kind of try to latch on to whatever we can latch on to. And in many cases, it becomes the hip hop artist, the rapper. And so therefore, their influence is magnified in their lyrical composition, and the influence that it has on us is magnified. And so I began to engage in this critical analysis. I looked at their 4 albums and I listened track by track over and over again. And I began to write down what words are being used the most over and over again. And based upon the repetition, you are able to identify the major themes. And based upon the major themes, you identify what the programming is. And then we can ask the critical question, whether or not the major themes that were presented within their lyrical content, was it in the best interest of the African American community? Was it in the best interest of young, impressionable boys and girls? Was it in the best interest of the perceptions that other groups of people have about African Americans? And overwhelmingly, and when you do the statistical analysis based upon the lyrics themselves, is quantifiable. You realize that the lyrical content had a deleterious effect, and it had far-reaching impacts on many people's lives, and many of the young brothers that I grew up with. It had a very negative impact. So I decided to put together a documentary in order to kind of share my findings. There's a lot of statistics that I compiled, and all that is verifiable. It cannot be denied. And that's pretty much the foundation of the documentary. Of course, we talk about a lot of other topics too.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes to actually, one of the individuals in your documentary explained it as the lyrics being suggestive. I love how she said it in that way. How would you say that we can become more aware of how it's affecting us personally, and how we can not allow certain material to kind of program us in that way.
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with conscious awareness of what it is that we're being exposed to. In other words, we have to think about what it is that we're listening to, and we have to think about whether or not it's in our best interest. And most people, when it comes to entertainment, we don't do that. You know, it's like, I'm gonna sit down, and you know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying whatever, but you also have to ask the question whether or not listening to it repeatedly is going to begin to influence how you think, your emotional state, the words that you use, how you dress, your behavior, how you act. And it has an impact over time. And the person that you're referring to is one of my favorite people on the planet. Her name is Sonia Barrett. And I'd asked her the question, do lyrics have the power to influence people's thoughts or their mentality? And she's one of the wisest people I've ever met. Her response was, they can be suggestive. In other words, they can suggest to people how it is that a person should think, how it is that a person should speak, how a person should behave. And so again, the critical question that we should ask, and this is what I mean by conscious awareness, is that programming, whatever it is it in my best interest? Is it in my children's best interest? Here's another way of looking at it, especially for you men out there, because when we talk about gangster rap in particular, that genre of music or subgenre of music, is the programming there in the best interest of me becoming the type of man that I need to be, or the type of husband that I need to be, or the type of father that I need to be? And so I think that that's where I think we have to draw the line between accepting things and the suggestions that are being made and accepting them subconsciously versus coming into a level of conscious awareness about what it is that we're listening to and asking the critical question whether or not it is in our best interest.
You know what's very interesting too about all of this is I think most of those brothers, when they started NWA, they were what, 18, 19, something to that effect. And they were very young guys, right? And it's very interesting how, you know, you could join the military at 18, you know, but there's things that you can't do at 18 because they feel like, you know, you're not adult enough, right? And I wonder if by taking these guys who were very young, who, you know, they're not thinking beyond right now in the moment, right? And give them that platform to put out what they did, you know, that you can push an agenda that is, like you said, against your own self-interest. I mean, should we put a lot of the, you know, should we put a lot of the blame on these kids who, when they were kids, now they're adults, but for doing this? And then, you know, it still goes on to this day, right? You know, in hip hop, is it, or should more of the onus be on the record labels or a mixture? What do you think?
Well, you know, the way that I look at it is that we are not in control of what other people do. And whether that is the young boy who is rapping and who doesn't necessarily have a positive message, or the record company that pushes that particular type of music. The way that I look at it and what I try to encourage is people to look at themselves and ask the question as to whether or not, as a listener, they are going to listen or not. You know, and so what I mean by this is that what we do have control over, and part of this is not getting into the blame game so much, because we can blame people all day, but the question really is, what do we have power over? And what we do have power over is what we choose to listen to, what we allow ourselves and what we allow our children to listen to. We have power over that. So that's, you know, I've had that question before, and I just want us to be careful because it's not so much about blaming anyone. Again, in the case of NWA, yes, we're dealing with young boys. And let me say something as a side note real quickly here. I hope I already answered the question. If I didn't, just ask me again. But the point that I want to make is that it comes down to, it's not about a blame, it's about responsibility. Who's responsible? In my opinion, the person who is most responsible is the listener. It's up to us. But I have to say something else, because this is one of the aspects of hip hop, just as a genre of music that permeates itself throughout hip hop, but then also within hip hop culture. And that is to say that what the preeminent perspective that is being presented within the lyrical content is that of young, immature boys, not grown, responsible men. And if we listen to the lyrics themselves, you will find this out to be true. And I always ask the question, when was the last time you heard a hip hop artist or a group of hip hop artists, and this music is being promoted, and they're talking about why it is that we should, as young boys, commit ourselves to becoming responsible men and everything that is entailed within that? When was the last time we've heard hip hop artists put forth consistently, and not only just put it forth, but also live that a message of being a dedicated husband to your wife, respecting women, not just words, but through actions. When was the last time we heard the elevation of the family institution? When was the last time we've heard hip hop artists speak about and promote fatherhood, and why it is important for us as fathers to be dedicated to our children and be there to be providers of and protectors of, the providers and protectors of life, the preservers of life? We don't hear that message. And the reason why we don't hear that message is because predominantly the people who are issuing the lyrical content are immature boys, many of which were not raised by men into men. So in other words, they don't have an orientation towards manhood that can be justified even within their own minds. They haven't even arrived at that place in their life. And there is a maturation process that is completely absent in many of them. And that is perfectly reflected in the lyrical composition. Now, again, to place blame, I don't think that's really the issue, because a boy is a boy. What the real question is, what are we going to do in terms of being responsible for ourselves, in particular as young men, so that we can push forth the message of manhood and fatherhood and being a dedicated husband? In other words, we can't expect young boys who are not raised properly to bring forth that message. It's not even within their conceptual reality. What we can do is, as men, present the best version or the best model of ourselves to the world and use that as the example. And that becomes the programming, if you will, that is going to have a much more positive impact on society. So I have to say that, because I think we have to look at the personal development of many of these hip hop artists, and this includes the hip hop artists who created this genre of music called gangster rap, NWA being one of the preeminent groups within that. But again, it doesn't excuse the behavior. We're just recognizing that the behavior is reflective of the mentality. And mentality is simply coming from young boys who are not mature.
Well, what's interesting is, I came from a household of, I had my father and my mother was there, really nice background. Never really got in trouble growing up as a kid. And, went to private school at junior high when I was in NWA. And I listened to NWA, heavy, right? Listened to all their albums and all of that stuff, bumped their music, and I was fortunate because I had so much positivity coming from my household. Like, my father's an activist, my mother, church, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it was entertainment, I'm not saying that some of that programming didn't affect me, but I think because I had so much other stuff coming in, I think I wasn't as affected as a lot of people who that's all they have is that, you know what I mean? Like, they don't have no other side. They have that. And it's over and over and over beaten into their head. So, you said the listener, right? I mean, I was a listener, I listened, as did most of the cats that I grew up with. But I mean, if you're a child and you get your hands in a hold of this, and it wasn't that my parents let me listen to it, I did it behind their back.
Yes.
It wasn't like my mom just said, "Here's the new NWA album," So I mean, it's not really fair to blame the listener, because I mean, I was a kid, you know what I mean? And, like, I watched horror movies behind my parents' back. I saw Jason.
No, I understand the question, but again, I'm not saying blame. What I'm saying is to take it out of the scope of blame. When I'm putting it within the scope of responsibility. And these are
Absolutely.
two very different things. In other words, that as a listener, as a child, you did make a choice, and you have to be held responsible for the choice that you made to listen. Now, it wasn't probably the best choice to make. Okay, I wouldn't want my sons listening to it. But on some level, if you choose, you choose. So part of what I'm saying is that I think a better word to use when we talk about the listener is being more consciously aware of what you're listening to, and then being responsible for yourself in terms of what you're listening to. And then as it applies to the record companies, or as it applies to the artists who put this stuff out, it's not so much about blame, it's about holding them accountable. I think that there's a difference, because when we look at I hope this makes sense. I'm not saying that somehow we are to dismiss the contribution, the negative contribution that some of these artists have, or that some of these record companies have. That's not what I'm suggesting.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that the empowered approach is for the listener in particular, because we don't have control over what the artist do or the rapper does or what the music industry does. But as the listener, that it is about being responsible for what it is that you are listening to, and also recognizing and asking a critical question whether or not it is in your best interest prior to listening to what it is that you're listening to. I hope that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. I completely understand what you're saying. I think that, it isn't about blame, and it is definitely about responsibility. And I mean, any factor like environment, whether the parents are there or not there, foster homes, it's so many variables in the situation that can affect how the outcome or how a child can receive the messages. And I mean, as far as what's going on now, I said I'm 36, so I'm still trying to learn the Cardi B's and all this new music, and trying to keep up with it, because I have a 9 and 10-year-old.
Mm.
And so, and you're a father of 5, you're a husband. So how would you suggest parents, especially that don't listen to that type of music, how would you suggest that we help our children, monitor it and help them understand the right and wrong of listening to music that way?
Yes. So I've heard people say things to me like, well, you can't protect your children from everything. Of course you can't protect your children from everything, but what you can do is you can prepare them intellectually. So in other words, what I mean by this, and I think this is something parents should do from the beginning, and it's not just about media, exposure to media. This can be about all different types of, this can be about male-female relationships. So, I've already talked to my sons about this real quick as a side note. Sons, the objective is not to try to somehow get a girlfriend. We don't even use that term girlfriend. It's like, that's not the objective. The objective is to learn how to interact with these young girls and to learn how to be friends with them. Well, yeah, kind of like how you and mommy are. Yes, that kind of like how me and your mama is. In other words, that's a part of preparing them intellectually for male-female relationships. In other words, we have to do this at a very early age. So let's flip this around with when it comes to mass media and the media exposure, and in particular when it comes to the radio. I've actually been, over the last week, I've been listening to this radio station out here, and the types of songs that come on. I know how every single generation, when you get older, the older folk, they be like, well, I can't believe what these young people are listening to. I was always like, what you talking about? Okay, now I'm 42 and I turn the radio on, and now I understand where those older folk are coming from, because what happens is over time, the musical composition, in particular lyrical content, becomes more and more degraded.
Yes.
And the topics that are being spoken about, in the manner in which it's being spoken about, and the perspective that these topics are the perspective that the artist is speaking on these particular topics are so irresponsible and dangerous. Now I understand why grown folks say, you used to say them. I'm grown folk now, but back in the day, but I don't understand what you young folk are listening. And so I was listening just the promotion. I remember back in the day, they used to promote alcohol, and be like, wow, I can't believe they're saying that. Then I remember Chronic came out. Dr. Dre was okay. Well, I was like, wow, can you believe this? Now it's like Vicodin, it's designer drugs, it's Molly's. And it's promoted like this is what I do, and this is what we should all be doing. And and it's always been there in terms of promoting things that are unhealthy for people, and in particular sexual promiscuity. But now it is so over the top. And I'm sure that, 20 years from now, it's going to be even further out of top. So what I'm saying is, again, we don't have any control over that. I'm sorry. I wish we did. What we do have control over is preparing our children so that when they are exposed, they can make an intelligent decision about whether they're going to watch or whether they're going to listen to or whether they're going to read. In other words, And we've done this with our children. We use the term what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And we've been talking about this from the time that they were babies. They have been prepared, and they know within them, there's a part within them that tells them there's something not quite right about this, and I should not listen, I should not read, I should not view. I remember, I'm sorry for going on, because it's such a very important topic right here, because this is what I mean by responsibility as parents. It's up to us. You can't protect them from everything, but you should prepare them intellectually so that when they are exposed to these types of things, they can make the best decision for themselves. I want to give one quick example. I remember back in the day, I think I was like in the 4th or 5th grade, and we were raised in a situation where there was so much contradictory information. On one hand, you know, my mother used to tell us that we shouldn't curse, but then my father was so abusive physically and verbally, he used to curse all the time, you know, and so there was time. And then we had relatives, I mean, they couldn't stop, but just, you know, and so you're raised like that, and you have to kind of make this decision on whether or not you're going to do it. And you don't do it while you're in your mama's presence, but when you get away, you might drop a little something. Okay. I remember this like it was yesterday. I was in the 5th grade, and I remember I was at school. It was at the school called Audubon. It was an all Spanish speaking school in San Diego, California. In other words, English was a second language. How about that? And we were standing by these bungalows, and there was these guys, some of my friends, I guess, and they were talking and they were cursing at each other. And in that moment, I wanted to participate, and I had this moment of where I said, should I participate? Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and start cursing. So I started cursing. And when I started cursing, there was something within me, even physiologically, that was taking place in my body. There was a feeling that I was having that I knew that this was not the right thing to do. And I kind of passed it off. And then the next time I cursed, I felt that again. And then, but then over the years, the more and more I cursed, the less and less I began to feel that. Okay. So what I'm saying is that on one hand, I have the ability to curse because I kind of grew up around it. But then on the other hand, I was raised in a household, at least from my mother's perspective, where she taught us that it was not the right thing to do. So that was instilled within me. And so when I did it, I knew instinctively that based upon what I was told, the intellectual process that was given to me by my mother, that it was not the right thing to do. Now, I'm not saying that people can't drop an F-bomb. I mean, hey, you know, I might do that. I don't do it in front of my family, but if I do a video, I might do that to be funny, what have you. But the point that I'm getting at is that as children, we are impressionable, and what we are told and the parameters that are set in terms of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate does have an impact on us. And we can prepare our children, whether it is the language that they use, whether it is their orientation towards sex, whether it is the music that they're listening to, the movies that they're viewing, the television shows that the male-female relationships, we can infuse within them these parameters, not limitations per se, but some guidelines that can keep them safe from harm, or that can put them in an advantaged position so that when they are exposed to these things, or when they are in the midst of other people and the peer pressure is there for them to do something that they know within their heart is wrong, they can make the appropriate choice. So I think I kind of belabored the point. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's fine. Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so there's so much I want to unpack with the movie specifically, but I would before I get into that, we talk about, you know, what we can do as far as attacking indecency with the labels and stuff, and there was a person that I've grown to have way more respect for, who's now deceased, named C. Dolores Tucker. Are you familiar with?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. She was a pioneer, and honestly, as a young person, you know, I feel bad that I looked at her as an enemy almost. Yeah, because I was young and not that bright when it came to that. But she was really above the curve in what she tried to do, as far as she saw the negative impact that a lot of this had on our community, and she fought for that. And she definitely deserves our love and respect. She was a wonderful person. So I just definitely wanted to throw that in there because she was one of the big fighters during that period of time when it was really breaking off. And, you know, and she really took a lot of flack from.
Very courageous.
Very courageous woman. Actually, she deserves a documentary to herself.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
She's a great woman. But one thing that I thought was so cool about your documentary was you actually scientifically broke down NWA's, specifically NWA's music, and you really went down and like you kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but one, I want you to talk about how you came up with that process that you used in order to analyze the music, and also what was the impact on you now as an adult. You know, I mean, having to listen to it over and over and over, you know, it's almost like you know, like a crack dog, you know, that constantly got to sniff crack, you know.
Oh no!
Like,
poor dogs.
Oh gosh!
Yeah. So what was the first question? I think you had two questions.
The first question was, how'd you come up with that process, and then what was it like having to
Okay.
into it over?
Yeah. Okay. So the critical analysis process, and part of what I did was to break down what critical analysis actually means, and basically what it is to approach any given content intellectually, and to figure out ways of quantifying whether or not it is in your best interest. That's kind of like, I guess you can say, the fundamental or the foundational part of the critical analysis. What the process that I came up with, and really what it was, it kind of unfolded organically, because initially what I thought to myself was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to these albums. I'm going to listen to each song over and over again. And I'm going to start writing down. This is what I mean by it's quantifiable, statistically speaking. I'm going to write down what words are being used. And then I'm going to figure out, and numerically figure out which words are being used. And based upon the repetition, the words that are being used over and over again, that's how you develop what the major themes are. And once you develop what the major themes are, there's a lot that you can do with that. You can begin to ask critical questions such as, okay, if the major theme is the promotion of alcohol, how is that major theme going to impact young impressionable children who listen to it over and over and over again? But then I took it like steps further, wherein I actually began to calculate per minute averages. How often will you expect to hear the promotion of alcohol in a minute of listening to NWA? I got to close this window because my neighbor he's drilling. I think probably an easier way of doing this. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So I broke it down track or album by album, and their first album was NWA and the Posse. A Posse. It was 12 tracks in over 50 minutes and 9 seconds, and the major theme that was presented over and over again, the most, and it occurred 177 times, was the disrespect of women. Now, the disrespect of women can come in many forms. That can be calling women out of their name. That can be the promotion of physical abuse against women. That can be verbally abusive towards women, calling women derogatory names, etc. So that is one example. 177 instances on their first album in a 50-minute and 9-second album. You can expect to hear the disrespect of women 177 times. Another major theme was self-aggrandizement. That occurred 87 times. And that's very common in hip hop in general, but in particular in gangster rap. And that is simply the promotion of oneself as being greater than everyone else. It's very verbally abusive. It gets to these ideas and concepts that kind of are ingrained within us as African Americans, many of us that were raised in a cultural dynamic wherein we accepted what is called playing the dozens. And that's when we're being very abusive. We call it dissing each other. A lot of the rap beefs are centered around this. Something we call it bagging or capping or cracking or basing. It depends on regionally where you're at in the United States of America. The idea is that to verbally abuse another person and they do the same to you, and it's quote unquote a game. Many people call it a game. And what happens is that the person who loses their composure first starts to cry or reacts in physical violence. They are the loser. And this is something that's played over and over again. So that's why, and the premise of the game is that you have to self-aggrandize and make yourself appear to be better than the other person. But in the process, you have to demean the other person to make yourself appear to be better. So self-aggrandizement was a major theme. And then another major theme was negative references to the female body. That occurred 66 times. And then the use of the word bitch was heavily proliferated through NWA, and that occurred 65 times. So in other words, I mean, I have a whole list of the common words, and these become the major themes that were presented just on that one album. So I'm trying to give just a general overview in terms of the process. So you can take those statistics, and then you can calculate how often you can expect to hear the disrespect of women within a 1 minute period. You basically just, you know, do some calculations. You got a 50-minute, 9 seconds, and then you got 107 instances of disrespect of women. So you basically calculate, okay, how often within a minute period will you expect to hear that? And I have all that outlined. So what was interesting was, what I mean by the organic process is that it grew because not only did I consider the first album, and I went through that process, I considered the second album, and then the third album, and then the fourth album, and then you can compile over the course of the discography, all 4 albums, what are the major themes, and then how often you can hear over the course of the 4 albums certain major themes being presented over a 1 minute period. And it becomes very staggering at a certain point when you really think about it, because on one hand, you can it's for many of us, it wasn't just that we listened to a song once, we would listen to it over and over and over and over again. So the repetition is the key. So if you're listening to a song that, let's say over the course of a minute, it promotes the disrespect of women, let's say 40 times, or let's say over the course of that track, let's say that it disrespects women 40 times, or let's say even 20 times. Okay, if you listen to that over and over again, that becomes programming. Let's say you listen to it 20 times, okay, in the course of a week or in the course of a year, what have you. Well, everything compounds itself over time, and then it starts to have a much more empowered impact on you in terms of how you think, how you speak, and how you behave. So this is what I mean by the organic process. And then by the time I got done with analyzing all 4 albums, I was able to calculate what were the major themes for all 4 albums, and then how frequent you can hear particular words, terms, and then particular major themes that are presented within their discography. And again, all this is quantifiable. You would only have to listen to their 4 albums and calculate over time. All of this is quantifiable. And there's one other thing I got to say, because you did ask the question, what kind of impact did this have on me? As I went through this process, as I listened over and over again, and at the time, you know, I was probably 40. I'm 42 now. I was probably about 4 years old when I began that process, because the critical analysis part, in terms of gathering statistics, it probably took me about 6, 7, maybe 8 months altogether. You know, one of the things that took place was that I began to reflect on the fact that when I was a child, I didn't think anything differently about it. I mean, I didn't think anything of it. And that was staggering, because as a grown man at the age of 40 with 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, I started to think to myself, what does that mean if I used to listen to this as a young boy and I didn't think anything of it? And yet when I'm looking at it now, I recognize how damaging and irresponsible the lyrical content is. So if as a child I can listen to it and I can accept it without any kind of critical thought or asking any critical questions, such as, is this in my best interest? Then what about all these other young people who are going to be reintroduced to this lyrical content once this movie comes out? And you know, that's precisely what took place. That there were people who weren't even alive when NWA was out on the scene, and because the movie was promoted, they went and go watch the movie. They enjoyed the movie, and the way the movie frames the group is as if they're like these social conscious rebels fighting against the system. When in point of fact, when you actually do the critical analysis that is quantifiable statistically, you realize that the vast majority of their lyrical content, 95% of it in point of fact, is actually very negative, very irresponsible, and very destructive to the mentality of young African-American children. So on one hand, I began to have that type of an epiphany. But then, you know, on the other hand, there was a part of me that was kind of fueled by it, because I recognized why it was important for me to get this project done. Simply because I recognized that parents needed, all of us, we needed the proper intellectual tools to prepare our children so that when they are exposed to these types of things, they will be adequately prepared and they can make the appropriate choice. It was not an easy process too, because my wife, she was used to ask me, you know, how's it going? Are you okay? It did impact me, because the lyrical content, the energy behind it. Obviously, if it's calling, you know, it's promoting calling women bitches and hoes and gang culture, promoting it as if it is somehow part of the ascendancy into manhood. That can have a negative impact even on me at the age of 40 at the time. So I can only imagine what type of impact that it had on me as a young boy, and what type of impact that it had on new listeners coming back to it, or being first introduced to it, or people who listened to it back in the day, let it go, and then now the movie comes out and then they begin to listen to it again. I hope I answered the question.
I'll real quick. When you were doing the analysis of the song "A Bitch Is a Bitch,"
yes,
and I listened to it back in the day. But when you had the lyrics up there, And I'm like, dang, it's pretty raw. Like I was like, wow. I was like, dang. I mean, I used to just sing that like nothing, yeah, it was something. So yeah, I get what you're saying, man. So go ahead, Quianna.
Um, Thank you for explaining that. I found it also very interesting. If you could let me know the young lady's name as well. She mentioned specifically that back in the day growing up, and it's for me because in my generation being a stripper was taboo. It wasn't the thing to do, and I love how she also explained that is not to down anybody or degrade anybody in that in any way for the choices that they made, but now being a stripper is kind of glorified. It's acceptable. And one specific thing, as you were speaking, I had thought about, in your documentary you explained that NWA, they weren't necessarily living that gangster lifestyle, but they were rapping about it. However, the interesting thing that I noticed about some of the women now, like the Cardi B's, they actually were strippers. They are rapping about, the money, and, I don't have to, what did she say? I don't have to work the pole anymore. Basically, that's what she's saying. So how can you kind of analyze how men, they're able to kind of storytell about this lifestyle, this gangster lifestyle. However, now in this generation, how women, they're speaking their truth in their lyrics. How would you analyze something like that?
Yeah, well, I think. Well, first of all, let me go back. The person that you're referring to is one of the individuals that we interviewed named Akonundrum, and she gave some very insightful. She was just awesome. People, y'all just have to hear how she breaks this down. How it is nowadays that we have a new generation of folk who have been raised with the sense that I'll use the language. It is a badge of honor to be a hoe. It is a badge of honor. Yeah, I'm a bitch. It is a badge of honor to be a stripper. Just as when we were growing up, there was a lot of young males who thought that it was a badge of honor to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
See, none of this fortifies this sense of positive male-female relationships or healthy family institutions. That's really, what the ultimate goal is in terms of the messaging that I'm trying to present through the documentary, that if, in point of fact, we want to raise young boys into men, that the manner in which we define, how we define manhood, it must be in line with this sense of ethics. That no, you don't have to go to jail. You don't have to commit crime. You don't have to be in a gang. You don't have to be a gangbanger in order to have street cred.
Right.
So part of what Akonundrum was speaking to was how that there is this dynamic nowadays, and a lot of it has to do with simply the media programming that is out there, and a lot of the lyrical content now, and this has been going on for quite some time now. It has promoted what I just simply call stripper culture, which is rooted in pimp culture. So on one hand, for young males in particular, NWA, one of the issues, and that's why I called it Gangster Blackface, was that part of the problem, I think, of their messaging was that they were speaking about things that were taking place in the quote unquote hood, but putting themselves as perpetuators of these things, even though they weren't the ones who were perpetuating these things. So in other words, gang culture as an example, because they promoted many different things, but one of the things they promoted was gang culture. The dawning of the gangster blackface, you have to put on a mask as if you are a gangster. We have a term called, these are studio gangsters. And, and I have an aversion to this simply because, I had family members who were gangbangers, and I had a lot of friends who were gangbangers growing up. And, there was something about their life that was very much real. Not that I agreed with the life choices, but a lot of them, they were put in certain positions where for survival purposes, they had to join a gang. But there's a difference between that compared to someone who simply wants to present themselves as a gangster so as to put forth this narrative or this storyline and then present that and proliferate that on the world stage as an accurate representation of all of us. And that now this is what is cool, and this is what we should strive for as young Black or African American and boys. And there was a lot of young men from my generation that I was growing up with that the music did influence them to move in that direction. Again, there's a lot of other influencing variables that, as you stated earlier, variables that come into play, but it did have a profound impact, and that cannot be denied. Well, now here we are, decades later, and it has gotten to the point where there are women who were quote unquote strippers in there because it has been accepted through programming over the last 15 years that this is the appropriate modeling and the best example of what you can be as a woman. That now it becomes a little bit easier for them to speak and talk about being a stripper or having been a stripper because it's looked upon as a badge of honor, which wasn't the case 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. Now, I'm going to say this because we're very careful in documentary. It is not about trying to pass judgment on a person, their human worth, or human value, because that's not what we're about. What we're really trying to illustrate to people is simply this, that if you are going to accept a modeling for what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, that it will be in your best interest to accept the modeling that is most empowering to you in life, and turning yourself into a sex object simply for the sexual pleasure of men, even if it's simply for them to sit back and fantasize pornographic fantasies of you as you are on that pole. Sisters, you can do better than that. Young men out there, same thing applies. If you think that, being the gangbanger or that somehow being the man out here having all this sex, I've yet to meet one person in my life. I've been on the planet for 42 years who has benefited long term from living a sexually promiscuous lifestyle. I haven't met one person. If you believe that that is what it means to be a man, okay, so be it. There's going to be a price that you're going to have to pay. But the critical question is whether or not you can accept modeling that is much more in line with you fulfilling your greatest potential as a man. And I would propose that women thinking that somehow you have to be a bitch or a hoe or a thought or a maggot, all the terminology, or a stripper or a pole dancer, if that's what you think, that's what you have to become in order to have dignity and to be respected. You need to transform your mentality about that. You are so much more than that. Your potential is so much more than that. Same thing for you young men out there. Your potential is much more than what that is kind of promoted and expressed through media, and in particular in hip hop, in terms of modeling for what it means to be a man, modeling for what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be quote unquote cool.
That's right. Now we have a caller. Caller, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can everybody hear the caller?
Yes.
All right. Say your name and where you're calling from.
This is Sam, and I'm calling from Atlanta.
What's up, Sam?
What's up?
All right, what's your question, man?
Well, actually, I've been listening to this like the whole time, and I have to say I was somewhat split on how rap lyrics and the lyrics in rap music, affects people. And so there was a conversation that I heard, and it wasn't eavesdropping, just happened to hear it while I was out and about. And these young girls were having this conversation, and they were talking about Cardi B and her lyrics and how she came up, in the game. And one of the girls said something that was it's so interesting, and it stuck with me. She was like, wow, that is so amazing. She started off on the stripper pole, and now she has all this money. She said, that's like a Cinderella story, And when she said a Cinderella story, I was just like, what does she mean by it's a Cinderella story? It's almost to the point to where I can choose to go this route and still make it, opposed to going another route, going to school and college, but I could take this route and still make it. So it made it as it was an option for her, And I never thought I would actually hear that, but it stuck with me when she said that was a Cinderella story. And growing up, I listened to the, NWA and stuff like that. It wasn't by choice. It was, your friends are listening to it, older cousins, brothers and sisters. So it comes across your ear and stuff. Never really thought much about the lyrics, because I was like, I heard them, I realized they were telling a story, but it flashed back my mind to, well, I heard this young girl today saying that that's a choice. Just because she heard that story, I have an option, so I can take this route and come up. And it made me wonder, what if she heard something else that was more positive? Would she say, you know what? I could take the lyrics that I heard in this song and go this route.
Mm.
It just stood out in my mind. I was like, wow, so lyrics do have a lot of influence, you know, to people. Not everybody, but I guess she was more impressionable, and maybe from where she grew up, this was an option for her. So it's just the whole Cinderella story. So yes, I do think it does influence some people, and that kind of drove it home for me. Like, wow. So people have to watch out for what they're actually listening to and what they're actually writing about. So it just makes me think if she had heard something else different from another positive song, would she have said, you know what, maybe that's the Cinderella story for me. But the way she said it and the way her face lit up was like, wow, you know, I can do this and still make it.
Yeah. And let me ask, what around what age was she?
She looked like she had to be like teen, maybe 15, 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you know, she was just hanging out with her friends, and I just happened to be like behind them in the checkout line. And, you know, they were talking loud enough just to hear, you know, their conversation and stuff like that.
That's pretty interesting.
It really is.
All right. So, all right. So, Sam, since you called in, you have an opportunity to win a free copy of the documentary, but you got to answer a question.
Okay. Okay.
See if you okay. All
right.
Okay. So, Lenon Honor said at the beginning of the show that he has how many children?
He has 5. He has, and I just heard it. He has 5 kids, 2 boys, 3 girls.
There you go. You got it, man.
3 boys and 2 girls, but you got the 5. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, you got it, man. So send me. We're on Facebook, right? Together.
Yeah.
Just send me your address and I'll forward it to Lenon, and we'll make sure you get it. Get your copy.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling in, bro.
Yes, thank you, Sam.
Hey, not a problem.
Mm-hmm. All right. If I can add too real quickly, what he expressed, that's not an isolated incident either, because I've heard younger folk talking about what they're listening to, and you can tell obviously it has an impact. I just want to give an example because we talked about this inside the documentary. Even our language, the words that we use is largely influenced by hip hop. A lot of people would say that no, hip hop is reflective of the language. No, in many cases, people are introduced to a whole new lexicon through the music itself. As an example, when you guys listen to early hip hop, especially coming out of the East Coast, there's terminology that they used to use that we didn't use on the West Coast. You know, as an example, son, you know, what's up? You know, I can't even use it because when I say son, I'm thinking my son. But on the East Coast, what's up? You know, so I don't even know how they do it, right? but what happened was, for a lot of people, the terminology is used so much inside the lyrics that they're listening to, and they can be on the other side of the planet. And then you start to use the same language and the same words, even though you weren't necessarily raised using that terminology. So not only is it the words, it's also the fashion. It influences how people dress, the type of attire that if they see in the music videos, young men dressing a certain way, a lot of people start to dress that way simply because they see it. If they see the women and they're, you know, scantily dressed and they're on the stripper pole, you know, there are young women, they'll see that as a Cinderella. You know, that's the Cinderella for me. So I just want to reiterate that this is not an isolated incident. It just goes to show you that everything has some influence. And the idea is whether or not, in terms of being responsible, and particularly responsible parents, whether or not we're preparing our children intellectually so that when they are exposed, they can make the appropriate decision.
All right. Thank you. All right. Now, before I know we have to leave, but I definitely want to get to something real quick about your documentary that I thought was so awesome. Is you had Brother Lonzo on in the documentary, and for those who may not know who he is, who probably seen Straight Outta Compton, so he was definitely depicted in the film Straight Outta Compton. Can you kind of give people a little background on who this brother is that was in your documentary?
Yes. So see, part of my my critical analysis was also, I did extensive research in the NWA. You know, I had a whole library of books. Some of them I still have, but when we moved, there's a lot that I had to kind of let go of. But this is what I mean by the research phase. we were talking probably about 8 months altogether. But there was also research that I'd done from my previous work when I was doing analysis on music videos that I kind of incorporated, and I kind of already had a knowledge base of. But I purchased all these new books, you know. I watched all these videos online, anything that had to do with gangster rap or you know, let's say the East Coast, West Coast beef, NWA. And I remember there was a video that I found on YouTube, and they were interviewing this brother, and this brother, I didn't know who he was, and he happened to be the founder of the World Class Wrecking Crew. And see, this is an interesting thing, because this is something I don't think I have in the actual documentary, but on the DVD that we have this extra footage, and he actually talks about this, the transformation of West Coast hip hop, what it was to what it became, because most people associate gangster rap with West Coast hip hop. That's what they associate. And it's interesting because even regionally, you have different kind of like subgenres within hip hop that is kind of presented, and gangster rap is kind of presented. You know, then you got the Dirty South, you know, you know, then you got the bling bling kind of thing, and then you also got the I mean, there's these different subgenres too that you. But on the West Coast, it's primarily known for the gangster rap. But what he talked about was how that wasn't the case when hip hop first came out. Even on the West Coast, when it started to kind of pick up traction, it wasn't about any of that kind of stuff. It was just kind of like a dance, feel good music. And he had a group, and you guys can actually find this, Lonzo Williams, and his group was very popular, very well known. They had a couple of hits. And one of the individuals who was in his group was Dr. Dre. This was before the Gangster Blackface Dr. Dre. We're talking about the Dr. Dre that was flashy and had on the flashy, and he's dancing around, because the music was more about a dance, and it was in a sense, it was more about like male-female relationships, kind of, sort of, you know, like you're on the dance floor, you know, as opposed to I'm going to go and I'm going to shoot people up, and I'm in a gang. This is a gang, and I'm in it. My man Dre will F you up in a minute. Okay. I got a lot of these lyrics memorized. I have to listen to it over and over again. Right.
DJ Yella was in that group too, by the way.
But yeah, DJ Yella was another person. In fact, one of the people who was instrumental in getting NWA off of the ground was actually introduced to Eazy-E through Lonzo Williams. So Lonzo Williams had signed Ice Cube. He wasn't Ice Cube then, but Ice Cube's group prior to the formation of NWA. So in other words, Lonzo Williams gives a very unique historical perspective on NWA, because he was there on the ground prior to NWA came on the scene, and he actually had a lot to do with NWA coming in, you know, to a prominence. In point of fact, he told a story of how NWA and the members, they would come to his house and they would record songs and they would hang out and all this drama. And there's a lot of stuff I couldn't actually put in a document. I said, okay, we can't put that on. But the point is, I think that Lonzo Williams is very important because he gives an accurate and a very honest historical perspective on what was taking place in the music industry during that time, and also how the music itself, hip hop, West Coast hip hop, was really being transformed and transmogrified into something totally different than what it essentially was, and that ultimately what it became was not necessarily the best representation of what hip hop had to offer here on the West Coast. The other thing too I want to say is he also, and I don't think I have this in the documentary, he talked about how it opened up this valve. And what he meant by the valve was that after NWA came onto the scene, you start to see this influx of a more quote unquote gangster oriented lyrical content. Because of their success, there were record companies that saw that as a model. Okay, if they can have success, then we can actually bring other people in and have them kind of present the same types of stories and actually make that profitable too. So NWA not only had an impact in terms of the music that they created, but also it has had an impact over the decades in terms of what the record industry and the record companies were willing to try out in order to generate more income. And most definitely the gangster narrative has been very profitable, but for the record companies in particular, many of these artists, but it has had a very damaging effect on the African American community. I tell you that for sure.
That's 100% true. Now, I before you go, I gotta get this in.
Well, take your time, bro. I'm enjoying this. Take your time.
All right, well, then, cool.
I'm so glad you're liking it.
All right. Are you aware if anybody from the group has seen your documentary or knows about it? And if so, have you heard any feedback?
No. I would probably think that someone may have heard of it. Whether they've seen it or not, probably not. The other thing too is that I try to be clear in terms of my analysis, because it's not an indictment against these individuals, because when they created this music, again, like I said, these were irresponsible boys.
Right.
They were not mature. They were not men in a sense of being operating as men within society. they were not necessarily intellectually gifted at that point in their life either. This is just being honest. The thing is that I was very careful not to make it a personal to them as individuals. It was a critical analysis. It was a scientific approach to the actual lyrical content that was written many decades ago. The other thing is that many of these, well, not many, some of them have actually turned things around to a significant degree and have made, and from my vantage point, have made remarkable strides in their life. And they can also present an example of how even those who have contributed in a negative way, maybe earlier on in their life, to the African-American community, to negative lyrical content and negative lyrical programming, can turn that around later on in life. You know, and they have done that too. Like, not all of them, but some of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I do have one more question. I do. I've really enjoyed the individuals that you chose to interview in the documentary. So I want to know, how did you decide who out of the 12, who you wanted to participate, and how did you come up with the questions?
Yes. Okay. So let me go. I'm gonna go onto the website, because on the website we have it, and I'm actually having the website redesigned, but I went ahead and put it back up a couple of days ago. But I have all the interview guests listed there. And so you know, initially when I conceptualized the documentary, I thought it was just going to be me and I was going to present my findings. It's just basically a rundown of the statistics. And there's a whole lot of statistics that I didn't actually include in the documentary, simply because I felt like it would have been too much. And I think some of it was already too much. A lot of people don't want to sit there. But I'm into stats. I like that kind of stuff. You know, I like averages. You know, I used to look at baseball stats. My grandmother used to do it too, and averages and RBIs and runs batted, you know, the runs batted ends and stolen bases and all that kind of stuff. So I have like this affinity for that kind of stuff. So initially, that's what I thought I was going to be presenting. I would show some lyrics, and we would kind of talk about the lyrics and what was being said in those lyrics. I think the song "A Bitch Is a Bitch" is an excellent example of that, of kind of breaking it down intellectually. Real quickly, not to get off topic, but brother, you made an important point. In particular, that song "A Bitch Is a Bitch," I used to listen to that too a lot. And I didn't think anything of it. And part of the reason why was because I wasn't asking critical questions about what was actually being said. A lot of times when we're listening to this, we're just being entertained and the music sounds nice. And so we're kind of susceptible to kind of listening without really thinking about it. Our intellectual processes are compromised because we're more in the moment and trying to feel good and what the music sounds like, as opposed to asking critical questions. Okay, what are they actually saying? And so one of the exercises that I encourage everyone to do, and do it with your children too, age appropriate, if their age is appropriate, is to you know, if they're listening to a particular song, just go online, pull the songs up, and then read them out loud without the music, and ask the question, what are they really saying and what are they talking about? You'll be amazed. You'll be like, wait a minute. And I was bobbing my head to that. What was that all about? So initially, that was what I was going to do. I was going to show some lyrics, talk about the lyrics, but then also begin to show my findings in terms of the common themes, the words that were being used, and the major themes that was presented, and then the per minute averages at which these particular words, phrases, and major themes are being presented within each album, but then their whole discography. But what happened was that as I was doing that, I recognized that it probably would not have been as personable, if you will. In other words, that there had to be a human element, and there had to be stories that needed to be told in order for people to really understand what ultimately the message that I was bringing across. And that's when I figured, okay, you know what, I think I should bring on some interview guests. You know, who would I select? And we have 12 wonderful interview guests. And I should mention that initially I wasn't even going to actually do anything other than present statistics, but we had people who was Brother Saladin. He had basically said, no, you need to actually speak in it too. You need to have a say and share some information. But let me just give a quick rundown real quick. I think it's just to honor everyone who's in the documentary, because I'm so thankful that they agreed to participate, and basically the funding for it was crowdfunded, but then I also put money in myself. I'm actually still paying for the documentary, but by the beginning of next month, I'll actually have paid off all of my debt associated with the documentary. Okay?
Yes.
It was a labor of love. But these people, they agreed, and I could only pay them what I had, and it was difficult to get them that, and I wish I had more to pay them, because definitely the information that they presented, it was much, the value of it was much more than what I was allowed to. Now I regret that, but I did the best I could. A Conundrum, she was chosen because she grew up in Southern California around the time when NWA was on the scene, And it was important to have a woman's perspective, especially a young girl at that time, in terms of the influence that music had on young girls. And it had a very powerful impact on young girls at that time period. Of course, Alonzo Williams, I think he's important because he gives her historical perspective, and accurate and very honest and candid one too. Also, he's hilarious. I think that was important too. I wanted there to be moments in the documentary people laugh. So I think he was an excellent choice. My wife, she came on board, and that was mainly because I wanted to show people that this was a project that my wife and I, she had to support me throughout this project, and we made a lot of sacrifices to get it done. So I think that it was a wonderful way to honor her by having her in the documentary. And then also what she shares in the documentary was also important. Gnu Rockwell, again, he's grew up in Southern California. He's also a hip hop artist. He's produced albums of music, and he has a very keen insight on hip hop and a very strong perspective on it. So it was important to have him in there as well. And there's a couple of other ones. Kedia Wadu, I chose him because I've known him for a long time, and he's been very active in the African-American community, and he's talked a lot about the entertainment industry, but also he had a very important perspective when it came to blaxploitation films, which was the precursor to hip-hop. And I think that what he kind of showed was the intergenerational dynamics to this, that it's not just a programming that my generation received. There was also programming that his generation received, my father's generation, and a lot of that was the whole pimp culture dynamic that was presented within that was presented within blaxploitation films. And a lot of the language and the terminology that you find in blaxploitation films, you find it in early hip hop, and there's a reason why, because the blaxploitation era was the precursor to hip hop. It's just programming for the previous generation, and then there was programming for my generation. So he really kind of bridges the gap in terms of the generational aspect of this. And then Luke Ellington, he's an old friend of mine. It was important to have him. He's another he's a rapper, producer, but he also grew up in Compton, and that's where NWA was from. And he had some very powerful stories that he told about growing up in that area during that time period. Mecca Islam was important for a lot of different reasons. And in particular, she is, as she said, a very strong proponent of hip hop. So it was important to have a woman's perspective who is a fan of hip hop, but then is also a mother to give her perspective as well. And there were two other people real quickly, Nubia. Actually, three other people. Nubia, what was good about, important about having her on board was that she's a little bit older than I am, but she remembers early hip hop on the East Coast. So it was important to have people from different places. And she actually knew, I can't remember who the individual was, but one of the early hip hop artists. And she talked about how she remembered hip hop and how it was more about fun and partying and that kind of thing. And I think that was important. And then Sadiq Bakari, this is a brother based in Los Angeles. He was important because he is also someone who has studied hip hop extensively. And he also brings a certain kind of professional delivery, which I really appreciated in the documentary as well. And then, of course, Saladin Assad. Actually, there's two other people. I'm sorry, everyone. Saladin Assad. I got to props to everybody. Saladin Assad, he was important. He wasn't just in the documentary as an interview guest. He gave a lot of perspective in terms of East Coast hip hop, but then also the East Coast, West Coast beef. And I think that was important to kind of dissect too. But he was also on the crew, and he also designed the website as well as the CD or the DVD design. He did that as well. That was really great. Sonia Bear, we talked about her earlier. She's just an awesome person. I think it was important to have her on for a lot of different reasons. But one of the more important reasons, I think, was her story when she began to talk about domestic violence. And the way that connects to the lyrical analysis of NWA was one of the preeminent themes that they presented was the abuse of women. And when that becomes a theme within really a genre of music, but in particular, that needs to be dissected simply because the influence that type of programming will have not only on the young impressionable girl can be very negative, but then also the young impressionable boy who begins to believe that somehow that is an appropriate way to treat women. And there are a lot of men who actually believe that, and young boys. A lot of the programs they received at a very early age. So Sonia Barry, she brings a lot to the table, but I think that her story when she talked about the domestic violence was very, very important. And then the last person was Wolfgang Amadeus, and he's a hip hop producer. He's also based in LA, and he gave stories about growing up. And they also talk about their family situations and the types of things they went through. I think all that was very important because it humanizes the project to where it's not so much simply about statistics, it's about seeing the effect that this has had on humanity. Well, what I mean by the effect that negative media programming can have and has had on humanity.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, of all the people that was on there, including yourself as well, and Lonzo and all those people, the person that I really, really enjoyed was your wife, your dear wife.
Oh, thank you.
she was awesome. And for her to share so much of her personal story, I thought it just gave the documentary that extra piece that it needed, and it put everything in the full circle. And I love that stuff. That was the best part of the documentary because it brought everything together. And I just really appreciate that you two, you guys such a power couple that you guys would share, that in the documentary, and it just added so much to it. And she was awesome to just hear what she had to say about the music and its impact and all of that, and then also to have your wonderful kids in the documentary. I thought that was cool, and it really showed your evolution, because you showed pictures of you back in the day, and you could just tell by the pictures you was on. You know what I mean? You didn't need video. You could just see the picture and say, okay, that's the different Lenon.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you don't want to run up on it now, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, it's real. It's real.
Oh, calling you out. He's calling you out.
I was like, oh man, you really look different in them pictures.
Yes, it's been a long journey. It really has, but it shows you, and by no means have I arrived. Like every single day, I'm trying to be better. I'm reading books right now just so I can be a better husband to my wife. I also want to be a better service to people that I talk with in terms of counseling for relationships, because sometimes I feel like I'm not doing the best I can. So I'm reading because I want to be able to do better, but there's something I have to say about my wife too. And there's two other people too. Let me mention my cousin Jamal Rashada. He was on crew too, and he was very instrumental in terms of getting this project off the ground and bringing the professional dynamic, because we really put together a good quality. The video is good quality. We have the B-roll footage with the drone footage, all that. That was all him. The lighting, that was all him. And then also got to give props to Gene Esther. He actually did the artwork that appears inside the documentary. So I'm very thankful. I just wish I had more money to pay people, because what they contributed was far. I mean, I just wish, but you do the best that you can. If I hit the lotto, I'll be hooking all of them up. Okay. I got to say something about my wife too, because this strikes me as I think about it, because one of the things when I look at the doc, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but from time to time, because I still need to do the YouTube version, and I'll get to it when I have some time. I've just been so busy, and we're still getting settled in here. I actually put the project, in terms of the promotion of the project, on hold once we moved here, because I had to get things in order for my family. We still got a long way to go. The job has helped clearing up some debt, and providing more for my family in the process. Baby got to have more food. Baby's got to have new shoes. All that. Okay, yes. It's 5 of them. It's not an easy task. But the point is that at a certain point, I think things are turning around where I can really start to promote the documentary and focus on it to where it can get out there. And that's why I'm thankful to be here. I'm so excited. It's like, I really appreciate this opportunity. There's something to be said about my wife, though, that I think is important, because there's so many different memories that come up because I've worked on this project for 2 years, and that's a long time. Mm-hmm. One of the things that stands out to me, and I'll remember this forever, is the day that we recorded all of the women, because on one recording session, we had all the men come in. And then I thought that was going to be it. But then I said, you know what, this, for balance sake, we have to have women in this documentary, and okay, well, how am I going to get the money I don't have the money for that. Okay, well, let's do a crowdfunding campaign specifically for a recording session with the women. So we were able to put that. And I'm thankful for everyone who contributed to the crowdfunding campaign too. So you have to see this. Thank you so much, because it wouldn't have been done without you. So we got the money together, and the day that we were scheduled to do the women's interview, my wife was supposed to be the first person, and we didn't leave the house on time. We got 5 babies. We had to wait for my mama to come up to watch the babies. And this was the first time ever my wife and I, we were away from our children together, right? Because this has been the case. That was the first time we had anyone else watching our children. Our children are homeschooled, so they're always with us all the time. Our 2 older boys, we're thinking about, they want to go to public school this coming next year. We're talking about that. It may happen. We'll see. But so my mom gets there. We're running late, and it's already a stressful situation, because there's been all of these preparations that I've had to make, for the month in advance, and scheduling and making sure, money is there, and making sure we have food and everything is laid out, and all the camera equipment is there, and the camera rental, or the rental stuff is all there in advance and set up, and all this stuff, that has to go into it. And my wife, she was with me throughout the whole process. So when we get there, we're running so late that we were unable to get to her at first. This woman is there from the time that we got there until the time that we finished recording all of the interview guests, the women interview guests. And so we're talking about 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, probably about 14 hours.
Oh, wow.
And she's there. She doesn't get an attitude. She's nice to people. She's happy. She's helping. You know, that it just goes to show the type of woman that she is.
Absolutely.
And then after all of that, we finally sit down to do her interview, and she is so tired. You know, she is so tired, not just from sitting around and helping out and getting, but also the fact that for the month prior, we're getting all this stuff together, and we have to make arrangements before we leave. And, so, I mean, it was just a very pressurized situation. And I think that it shows her character, and it also shows her support of me as her husband. I mean, you can't dismiss that as being like, an accident. It's something that is very powerful. And I think that it speaks to her character as a woman and the type of supportive person that she has been for the last 17 years, and she continues to be. I mean, it was so many hours, and she was hungry, and the whole time I'm trying to deal and focusing on these women and trying to make sure that their needs are being met and that the questions are there and that everything is placed properly and people coming in and then they leave and she's there the whole time and she's totally supportive. And I think that that's part of what people feel when they actually hear her speak, even though by that time she was thoroughly exhausted. I think more the powerful part is not just her message, but the energy that surrounds her, and it's very much supportive. So I'm gonna use this opportunity. My wife and I, we didn't do anything special for our 17-year anniversary, and I think I got her some. She was saying she was craving some Chinese food, so I went and got her some vegan noodle bowls. Okay. But the thing is, we've been together so long that we don't even really think about those types of things, because ultimately it's about how we treat each other each day. So it's kind of different. But I just want to say, I'm sorry, because when I talk about my family,
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I think part of what people feel when they actually hear her speak is that supportive energy that is very profound. And if you men, when you are in a positive relationship with a woman like this, there is nothing that you can't achieve as long as you're doing your best. And I think that this documentary, this was the best that I can do, given those situations and circumstances. And we were living at that time, the kind of stuff we were dealing with, the budget that we had, this was the absolute best that I could do at that time. But I would not have been able to do it without my wife's support for those 2 years, but in particular on that recording session. I'm going to remember that, until I leave this planet, because it speaks to her character as a woman. And I think that is something that people pick up on, whether that is, on her Facebook page or when we do videos together, or whether that is within the documentary itself.
Man, and you can feel that vibe, just by, in the documentary. And, I've been following you for a while, so I'm very aware of your relationship as far, and, from the different content that you guys put out together. And I just think it's beautiful, and it was perfect for the documentary, because I think what we needed to see was you making this transition, because it's about yourself as well. It's a journey to go on as well. And I thought that was excellent, man. And just to let people know, because one thing I want to come out of this is people to go and buy the documentary. I have a chat open. I'm going to put the link in there, and I want people to go and buy it. Go and purchase it. We need to support filmmakers who go out there, who try to, we always say we want more, we want better. Why don't they do this? Well, here's this brother doing it, right? And it's an excellent film. It's very high quality, number one. It's very high quality. The content is awesome. And this brother is a musician. You have original music as well in there.
Yes. I produced the soundtrack as well. And that was a whole other process too, because I I had set music aside for many years simply because I was, I had a family to take care of. Ideally, I like to do music and take care of, and I just haven't arrived. Like you were saying, the transition, maybe I'll get to that point at some point, but it was necessary for me to purchase equipment so that I can actually produce a soundtrack for the documentary. And in my opinion, it came off nice. It really did. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome. And also, like I said, I've binged through a lot of your work. I came, I guess, on the train a little later. But all the content that you produce is awesome. And this is like the top, of all the work that you've done. This is like, up there. So, but all the work that that you do is awesome. It's funny. There's a lady listening. Her name is Peaches. She's a musician herself. And when I announced that you were going to be on my show last time, she knew who you were. Like, she was like me. She was aware of your work.
Okay. How's it going, Peaches?
She was like, maybe y'all should collaborate. I was like, oh, you know about him too. Like, it's like you were like this thing, like how you have like this kind of underground thing. And when you find out someone else knows about it, you're like, oh, okay, you in the club too, right? So I wanted to give a shout out to Peaches, especially because she knew about you way before I did. So, and she's a big fan of your work as well.
Well, thank you, Peaches. I appreciate that. And brother, let me also say that I do consider this to be an important work. I've done a lot of different things. I consider this to be one of the most important things simply because of the time. 2 years, that's a long time. Mm-hmm. But I also have to say that that there were people who support this project, not only just the crowdfunders, but also people like I mentioned earlier, my cousin Jamal, Saudi Nassar was very instrumental. And then, of course, my wife's support for those 2 years as well. So this all to say that if there is goodness in it, I think, part of it is because of my contribution. But I have to say that overwhelmingly, it has to do with the contributions of the interview guests, the crowdfunders, my wife, and these brothers that were on the crew, Saudi and my cousin Jamal. So good things can come. And those good things can be even greater when you have this type of support. And I received a whole lot of support to get this project, and I'm thankful for that.
Now, I got to ask you the dreaded question, what's next? What are we going to get from Lenon next? I know you always put out content on YouTube. So do you have any documentary ideas that you want to do? I know we're paying off this one. So, but we got to get to the next one. So.
Yes. And I have a lot of creative ideas that run through my head all the time. I mean, there's a song that's been in my head for like 2 years, and when I'm at work, it pops in and I can't get it out. Until I actually produce it, it's going to keep popping up in my mind, and it gets annoying because it's been about 2 years. There's a lot of video, well, not a lot, but there are video projects that I have ideas about. But like you said earlier, transition. I think what happened for me was getting here to Utah was a transition. But then it also sparked a new transition for me in terms of my ability to provide for my family. Ideally, I would like for all this creative work to be able to be substantial enough to be able to create and generate the type of income that I would need in order to take care of my family the way that they deserve. But that hasn't happened yet. So what I decided to do was to set things aside. And it has been the appropriate decision. It wasn't easy either, trust me. Because you figure you put 2 years into a project, and then now you're at a point where you can actually begin to generate income off of it. But the amount of time that you would have to put into promoting it properly, and even the amount of money that you're going to have to put into it and to promote it properly, it's going to continue to put your family in a hole. And so I had to make this decision, and it became a new transition. And I picked up this job, and the amount of hours that I've been putting in, and the physical component to it, all right here hurts right now. All right here hurts right now. My hands haven't looked like this ever. I mean, it's just so. And physically, I'm tired. So this is part of my transition. But as one of the most important people I've met in my life, one of the wisest human beings I've ever met, Sonia Barrett. I saw her 2 weekends ago. We were at the same conference speaking, and we were sitting down, and she's talking, and I'm listening. I always listen, and she casually says, "You're there. And you're doing what you are supposed to do right now. And there are some important lessons that you need to learn right now. It's a transition period. And once you learn those lessons, a new opportunity will come and things will open up for you, especially in terms of speaking." And then she smiles and she goes, now, that'd be $200. and I laughed so hard. But what she was doing was, she was, on one hand, she was speaking the truth, but she was also giving me encouragement and saying, hey, look, you know, you set things aside, and I understand why, and it makes sense because you have to do this for your family. But this is necessary because it's a transition, and there's lessons that you're going to learn. And once you learn these lessons, you're going to be propelled. That's the term she used. You'll be propelled to do more and to reach more people. And that will also, and she also said that will also help you financially. The financial abundance will come as a consequence. So the point is this, and I'm so thankful because I remember that. And when she said it, I mean, it sticks with me as I go into work and I'm doing something I don't necessarily want to do, but I have to do right now. And there's lessons I'm learning on the job. I just remind myself that there will come a time where in this particular transition, a newer transition will take place, and these other opportunities will come. And then a lot of these creative ideas, and I can't even tell you how many ideas that run through my mind. A lot of the musical ideas that I have, documentary projects that I've thought about, there will be an opportunity, that there'll be the time and the finances for me to engage those things. But in the meantime, what I hope to do is to continue to put my best foot forward for my family and get us fully settled as a family here in our home. And once that is taken care of, I'm sure that the next opportunity will come. And I'm thankful for that when it does come.
Just to let you know, you have to forgive me. I was slow on the draw, and someone called in. So please call right back so we can get you in right before we go. Yeah, I was a little slow on the draw when picking up the phone call, so I gotta switch it. It does the go to it forwards pretty fast. So, but anyway, Quianna, do you have anything before we say goodbye?
I just want to thank you so much for joining us, and as Kinte said, we haven't done this in such a long time, and I'm so thankful that it's you. That we had the opportunity to speak with and learn more about the documentary, and all the listeners able to learn more. And
Sorry about that.
oh no, it's okay. It's okay. But I just wanted to thank you so much. I enjoyed the documentary. I enjoyed because I did not grow up listening to NWA. I didn't grow up listening to much music until I was in high school. Then it's ironic when you spoke about like Biggie and Tupac. In high school, that's what I listened to. But younger, I was outside when you mentioned baseball. I love baseball. I played, the Ghost Man. You didn't have enough players. Remember you had the Ghost Man.
That's right.
And so I'm just so thankful the perspective that you bring, and to help people think a little bit further, be a little bit more aware of the impact that music, the good and the bad, and how you're able to help people think a little bit more about it, and not in a negative way, but just be more aware of what it brings to the table. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And I want to make it clear for those who may think this is a movie like bashing NWA and saying they're the worst things ever. It's not that at all. It's really not that at all. So, because there's some people, they're fans of the group, so they get very territorial about about it. But I think it's a fair analysis of their music and their impact of it. And if you balance that with the movie that they made, I think you get some of the more of a fair representation of their impact. And so if you think that, because I think there's some people that may think that, oh, okay, so this is just a movie saying that these guys are evil and all of that. It's not that, right?
Not at all.
It's a critical analysis of their lyrics, and it's not personal either.
Right.
That's what I mean by I didn't want it to be about, because there's a whole lot in my research that I found, things that a lot of people even couldn't, and I'll say this, I was a fan too of NWA. But just because you are a fan doesn't mean that you should not ask your critical question whether or not what you're listening to is in your best interest, whether or not what you're viewing, whether or not what you're reading, in other words, and it's difficult because as fans, it comes out of the root word fanatic, and to be fanatic isn't necessarily grounded in having proper intellectual process. It's more about the emotional attachment that we have. And I understand that. And I think that there is a reason for that. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for us to reach beyond the emotional component and begin to ask the intellectual questions, because the intellectual component is what actually puts us in a better position to protect ourselves and protect our children from negative media programming. So the documentary isn't about NWA as individuals. It's about their lyrics and the impact, good or bad, that their lyrics have had on the African-American community in particular, but then also the perception that other groups of people have about African-Americans. I think that that's a fair project to engage in.
Right. It's funny though, like, based on the other work you've did, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect, like it was gonna be a hatchet job of NWA or something like that. But I thought it was very fair. I mean, it was very, very, very fair. I thought the way that it dealt with it. And I thought that, if you can't take that, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not true.
Yeah.
You're just saying,
That's right. And see, the analysis is quantifiable. It's honest and it's scientific. It's statistical based. You can't deny it. You have to look at the lyrics and actually analyze the lyrics. And oftentimes, as a fan of anything, we don't do that. And there's another component to this too. I think that we have to understand the psychological component to this. For a lot of people, especially African American folk, what hip hop artists have become, and what hip hop groups have become, and what hip hop itself has become, for many African American folk, it has become almost a religion. And in other words, how can I say this without offending? In other words, for a lot of people, and not even just religion, it has become for a lot of people, in particular young males, the hip hop artist becomes their surrogate father.
Right.
And what the father says has meaning to them beyond the intellectual part. It has more of an emotional meaning about making them feel good in the moment, because it makes them feel as if someone is speaking to them. There is a man who is really an immature boy, the rapper, who's speaking to them and giving them particular insights that make them connect, that makes them feel connected to someone that they perceive to be like a father figure. So I want us to understand that the psychological dynamics of this. And see, I understand this more now because I have 3 boys, and my oldest is 14, the youngest is 6. And I have seen over the last 14 years this need to identify with that father figure as, and this is no different than what I was seeking when I was a young boy. I was seeking to identify with something out there because my father wasn't there, or because he was there but wasn't necessarily a representation of manhood that I can necessarily hold on to because there was so much abuse there. I already knew instinctively that's not the modeling that I can adhere to. So psychologically, for a lot of us, in particular in the African American community, without the positive male role modeling in our lives, we often look to the hip hop artists or the sports athletes because they are the ones that kind of get the most attention. And I understand where that comes from, but then we still have to ask the question whether or not the messaging that they are presenting is in our best interest. Is it giving us an accurate representation of the steps towards ascending into the realm of a man, moving beyond the scope of being a boy, moving beyond the scope of being a young man, moving into the scope of becoming a man, moving into the scope of becoming a dedicated husband, moving into the scope of becoming a dedicated father? See, those are the critical questions that we should ask. And when we ask those critical questions, it's not an indictment against the people who produce the content that move us in the wrong direction in terms of ascending the vicissitudes, if you will. It's more about us asking the critical questions for our own personal empowerment so that we can put ourselves in a position to say and choose either to continue to listen or to discontinue listening, either to continue to be a fan or to discontinue being a fan. And see, here's the thing. Many of us, we became fans in our youth. We became fans when we were a boy or a girl. We became fans when we did not have proper intellectual process. Our minds were still developing. Our bodies were still developing. Our brains were still developing. And then on top of this, in the absence of having the positive male role modeling in our lives, we attached and we reached out and we tried to grab onto whatever it is that we could. And for many of us, what we grabbed onto was the hip hop artist. I'm not saying that somehow that is wrong, that is somehow wrong, because in many cases it's a survival instinct. It is the means to which young African-American males are trying to find a way to survive by trying to attach themselves to something that they perceive to be greater than themselves. But the critical question is, are you greater than that? Are you greater than what you perceive to be greater than you? And I think that that is a fair question to ask. And I also think that as intellectual beings, as we grow and as we mature, we should begin to ask these types of questions more and more, so that we can ascertain or determine whether or not the programming that we receive was in our best interest. And if we decide that it is, so be it. But if we decide that it's not, then we have to dismiss with the fanaticism and step into the realm of the proper intellectualism, which I always ask the critical question, whether or not this is in my best interest. Now, if you are a fan of something that was not in your best interest, if you're a fan of something that is not in your best interest, if you're a fan of something that is not in the best interest of the African American community, if you're a fan of something that is not in the best interest of your wife, if you're a fan of something that's not in the best interest of your own children, well, now you need to ask critical questions about yourself as a man, your own character. So there's different ways of looking at this. So on one hand, I understand where people are coming from, because I attached myself to certain people. Once Ice Cube left the group, I attached myself to Ice Cube, and then he started to get kind of revolutionary, and he started to talk on quote unquote conscious, but I only perceived it to be conscious based upon my limited consciousness as a 17-year-old. Now at the age of 42, when I go back and I engage in critical analysis and I'm listening to it, I'm like, no, it was only the perception, and I was a fan of what I perceived to be something that was greater than me. But see, now in my older age and the levels of responsibility that I have, I can look back at it fairly, with fairness, and say, no, that was not the best representation of what I can become. And I most definitely will not allow my sons to perceive that to be the best representation of what they can become.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree, man. It's a conversation that we definitely need to have. I've been grew up on hip hop, grew up on NWA, grew up on DJ Quick, Too Short, all of that stuff.
Too Short.
And it's like, would I let, if I don't have any kids, but if I had, would I let my kids listen to it now? I don't think so. No. And if anybody who don't believe about, because at one time we're gonna have to have a conversation deeper, even more so on the programming aspects of what you talk about, because I always tell people everything is programming. Anything that you watch, anything you listen to, there's a message that they're trying to push in it. I remember someone told me, yeah, you're right. That's why I only let my kids watch the Disney Family Channel. I'm like, they're the worst ones.
That's right.
Straight to the Lion's Den.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, and the programming is negative towards you and what you're trying to accomplish as either as a parent or as a person, and you have to be aware of it. And most people are not aware, and that's how you're more susceptible with it. So when I watch stuff, I always have that in my head, that what are they trying to, what is it that they're trying to teach me, tell me what's in my head. Like recently Black Panther came out, right? And I love the film, awesome film, right? But also you got to look, as much as we love the film and the beautiful visuals and the great work that was done, is like, what is the message that they're trying to put in it?
But don't tell me though, I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it either.
Don't say.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, we found the two Black people who
You said I knew this was gonna be awesome.
Now, Kinte, I do not usually watch.
I've seen it like
I don't watch TV
3 times already.
Really. Oh boy.
I've seen it for myself, and I've seen it for Lenon, and then I've seen it for Quianna. So but it's a great movie. But don't think that there's nothing that is produced that has that is not some sort of programming in it. And there's a guy who's a lecturer. He always says that, because they always say, well, we only make this content is because that's what the people want. It says they never function on what the people want. They create the desire, instruction.
That's right.
They don't bother with, oh, this is what they want. No, they make you want what they want you to want. And people, nobody wants to admit that, because they feel like, oh, they ain't got me. They got you. So it's very important that people understand it. So I want to first start off by if people want to purchase this film, how can they do so? What are the different ways? What's the website and all that?
Yeah, so if you want to pick up a DVD, which I would encourage you to do so, the DVD has the documentary plus, I can't even remember, an additional hour and 20 minutes, I believe, something to that effect, bonus material. You can head on over to the website Beyond Gangster Blackface, and you can .com, beyondgangsterblackface.com, and you can purchase your order there, and I'll ship out the week that you actually purchase. You can, and then also we also have a streaming site. So if you want to actually view the documentary online, the full documentary online, you can go to our streaming site. And this is, my goodness, actually, so I'm going over to the website first, because there's a link on the website. So the website is beyondgangsterblackface.com for the documentary. And then there's a link up there also that says watch film. And when you click on watch film, it'll take you to another site, which is beyondgangsterblackface.vhx.tv, beyondgangsterblackface.vhx.tv. And you can actually watch the videos, the streaming version. It's the same as the one that's on the DVD. The DVD has bonus material though. And you can rent it. I think it's like a 3-day rental or something like that for $4.99, or you can purchase it in full for $14.99. You can watch it whenever you want to beyond the 3 days. So those are the two ways that you can actually either view, or you can or actually order a physical copy, the DVD. And I want to encourage everyone to do so because we talked about this earlier. It'll help me to continue to put out more empowering content.
And my slow self, I planned on getting the DVD, but renting it because I couldn't wait, So I wanted to watch it, but then have the DVD coming. But I think I accidentally bought the stream version instead. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and buy the DVD for myself as well. And but I also currently own the streaming version, which is awesome. It looks great and all of that stuff too. So either even if you rent the DVD, rent the film, make sure you buy a physical copy and then tweet it. Let people know. Put it on your Instagram, on your Facebooks, and let people know that you purchased it. And we have to do better in supporting our film, and including myself, in our filmmakers, our artists, our people who go out. They take they take a chance. They bet on themselves, and they put this stuff out there. We're so quick to support the man, or we'll throw out our money easily, to Disney or whoever. Let's support each other. So I'm gonna like I said, I already got the stream version, but I'm gonna go ahead and tonight I'm gonna buy my own copy, as well as we're gonna get it out to Brother Sam, a physical copy of the DVD. And when I get it, I will tweet, Instagram, all of that, let people know. And whether you agree or not or whatever, if you're Ice Cube's cousin, just buy the film. Just buy the film. Quit your complaining.
Well, yeah. Well, let me just also add that the film is not just about NWA too. I think that was one of the important aspects of this, because when I was writing the documentary, we just use them as an example. We use their lyrical content. Okay, not the individuals. We use their lyrical content, which cannot be disputed because they actually wrote the lyrics. And if we show it there up on the screen, and all I encourage people to do is to engage in critical analysis of those lyrics. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can still be a fan and think critically about the lyrics that you're actually listening to. But one of the most important things I think that we tried to impart within the within the documentary, was a message about manhood and fatherhood and motherhood and womanhood and male-female relationships. So part of what we do towards the end of the film is I actually take the time to actually, and they did such a fantastic job. The interview guests were all awesome. I actually interview guests specific questions about male-female relationships, about what does it mean to be a man? What advice would you give to a young father? What advice would you give to a young mother? And you guys would be amazed at the types of stories that they begin to tell. And I think that was an important component to the humanization part. It's not just about NWA. It's really about the value and importance of us thinking critically about media, because a lot of the dysfunction that we find within our community, within ourselves, within male-female relationships, it's derived from the type of programming that we've been receiving since we were in the womb. And so, you know, it's not just about NWA. It's about these people's stories and about the information that they can share and the encouragement that they can give based upon their own personal life experiences. And many of them, they share things that are you know, difficult stuff. But it goes to show you that no matter what it is that you've gone through, that you can overcome and that you can actually create a life that is blessed. You can create a life that is enjoyable, not just for yourself, but for your partner, but then also for your children. So I think that's an important component towards the end of the documentary. That's precisely what we do. And I think that story in and of itself, that messaging in and of itself, that programming in and of itself is an important component to this that I think everyone can benefit from, regardless of whether or not you're a hip hop fan or not, or you're an NWA fan or not. That the ultimate theme of the documentary is this process of self-empowerment through self-improvement. And all the interview guests, they did a fantastic job of showing their process throughout the documentary of empowering themselves and transforming their lives in a positive way. And that's what I want for everybody.
That's right. And looking forward to your next project. How can people get you on Instagram? I mean, on social media as well as your website?
Yeah, so Lenon Honor is my website, LenonHonor.com. That's my main website. And then, of course, BeyondGangsterBlackface.com. That's for the documentary. I'm also on Facebook under Lenon Honor. I have a fan page, but then I also have a regular Facebook page. I'm on Twitter, but I just basically connect that to my Facebook so that when I post on Facebook, it posts on Twitter, okay? I'm also on Instagram. I don't post it that often, but I do post on Instagram. And then, of course, I have a whole lot of content on YouTube, all types of things. We, you know, close to 1,000 videos, I think, at this point, and I encourage people to go check that out as well. And one of the messages, or important messages, that I try to bring on my YouTube page is, you know, this journey of manhood, and this journey of fatherhood, and this journey of husbandhood. Just as you said, brother, earlier, there's programming good and bad out there, and everything has an influence, and everything does function as a programming. Well, my wife and I, we tried our best to present a loving family to you all, a man and a woman who are trying their best to do their best by each other, but then also by their children. I think that's an important messaging. And we've been through situations, we've been through some trials and tribulations. What was it? 8 months ago, we were living in hood-like conditions, dealing with all kinds of madness. And yet here we are these months later, and the type of life that we're living, it is beyond what we ever conceptualized being possible. But the reason why it has manifested has been because of our commitment to each other and our commitment to our children, and then trying to put forth the best example that we can to the world. And you'll be amazed. Once you start to extend it out to the world, it starts to come back to you. It starts to come back to you. It starts to come back to you. And that's precisely what happened for us. I think that's an important message. That's an important program to present to the world.
I love it. And give me a moment to aggravate my lovely co-host.
Oh no!
We haven't done a show, as we said, since 2016, and she's gone through a lot as far as moving and all that kind of stuff. And I really, really enjoy working with this sister. She's great. After seeing your documentary, Lynn, and I said, I'm gonna start treating Quianna nice. I'm not gonna give her a hard time no more.
There you go.
As he just said, he wants to aggravate me. Did you hear? Okay.
One last one in, before I gotta quit. I can't quit cold turkey. But I want to thank you so much for participating again in this interview, and hopefully we'll have more content for the people going forward. So I want you to do you have anything that you want us to be aware of, websites and social media or whatever?
For me, you want me to give out my information? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I mean, what you public stuff, not the private stuff.
Well, you could find me across the board on social media at Happy Work Week. My website is happyworkweek.com. I really focus on Instagram. I haven't posted in a long time because, as you said, I made a transition from Charlotte, North Carolina to Northern Virginia, where I grew up. And it has been a transition. So, brother, I know what you're talking about. It was a big move, and I'm so thankful that I did it. But across the board, YouTube, Instagram. I'm not a fan of Facebook. So, but I am on Facebook. Everything is at happyworkweek.com.
So
That's where you
go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, if you want to talk badly about Quianna, just do it on Facebook. She won't know.
Like she won't see it. She ain't gonna see it.
Go right on ahead. Go right ahead. Yes, thank you. And how can people find you, Kinte?
Yes, they can do so. You can get me. You can get me on Facebook. I haven't gotten rid of them yet. They're still in the mix. But you can get me on Twitter at Kinte F and Kinte Fergerson on LinkedIn, as well as Instagram. That's Fergerson. Every Friday, we normally do our show, The Spotlight, with my co-host Jen, if she's in there. She's awesome co-host as well. And Brother Yardley, we're about to start doing covering a TV show called The Terror. That's just starting. So you know more about it than I do. So I'm going to go into this fully blind. So, I think we start this week coming up week, because I think it starts on Monday or something like that.
Doesn't it start tomorrow, right after The Walking Dead?
Ooh, I should know that, right?
Maybe. I think, right? Is it on
something
AMC?
like that? It's like a 2-hour premiere, so we're going to be covering that show. It looks good though. It looks good. So keep on a lookout for that. As well as, like I said, we're going to be doing Mars Venus is coming up soon. We got a lot of great topics, some really good, stuff that's coming up, and hopefully we'll have a show here and there with Black Empowerment 365. And also, I've been very busy. We have some film stuff coming up. I have a documentary I'm working on as well, and it's called Black Artists Connected Los Angeles. You'll hear much more about that coming up. And also, there's some short films we're gonna do, and a web series, and all this really cool stuff. It's a great year so far, 2018. It's only getting better. I've been blessed quite a bit this year, and it just seems like the trajectory is going up. So I'm just really I'm a I'm doing very well right now, and I'm very happy, and I'm happy to be here with you guys. And of course, you can go to our website. It's called indyradio.org. That's INDY radio.org. So we'll catch you next time. Peace.